Welcome to the Kent Lapp Podcast.
No, I think maybe it would be, we should at some point kind of break out the different drugs that we're talking about when we talk about drugs, because we've thrown about a couple different kinds. And I think that it's helpful, especially as it relates to talking to my kids about drugs. I've found it helpful to go pretty specifically like this, and this, as much as I know and can tell about these various things. And so it's like you've got your, we've talked a lot about cocaine. And so that's an opiate, I believe. So you've got that whole opiate family. You've got the...
What else is included in there?
Opiate, you've got...
Well, heroin.
So from least powerful to most powerful, the opiates go from codeine. So codeine is the least kind of processed, I guess. So codeine, hydrocodone, which is often used in pain pills, morphine, which is used obviously, and then oxycodone, which is a common prescription pain pill that
Oxycontin, right?
Yeah, it gets abused a lot. And then hydromorphone.
Well, Oxycontin gets abused a lot, dude.
Yeah. And then you've got fentanyl, of course, which is like, crazy powerful. It's like a little dose the size of a pinhead, like can jack you up. Like I think theoretically could kill you, I think. It's like wildly powerful.
Wow. You said fentanyl.
Fentanyl.
And these are all part of the opioid family?
Those are all different opiates. Yeah.
And you mentioned morphine, right? Because that's one too.
Morphine's in that. Yeah. Yep. Morphine was kind of one of the early opiates that were isolated.
Okay.
And then you've got amphetamines, which so opiates act on the dopamine system to a certain extent. It's one of the effects of it. And then amphetamines do too. Amphetamines, one of the systems that they act on is that dopamine receptor in your brain. So those are the commonly abused. There's a lot of abuse that happens in those categories. You have psychedelic drugs, that are, and this is why I think it's important to draw a distinction, because growing up in an evangelical fundamentalist church, I just thought of drugs as being drugs. Like I thought of, cocaine as being largely the same as heroin, being largely the same as, maybe LSD or something. And it's like, well, nothing could be further from the truth. And frankly, when you're talking about things that can kill you, it helps to speak about it with some specificity. Like, if you...
Helps quite a lot.
And so I think it's helpful. I try to sit down and talk to my kids. It's like, are there drugs in your school? Well, what kind of drugs? Are we talking about, is there, a junior high guy hitting the vape pen and getting some nicotine? Is he getting some THC? Is he getting, is he popping no-dos to stay awake?
Yes.
Is he, smoking a joint, cannabis? Is he or is he using heroin? Or is he using, cocaine or, meth or, ecstasy or, like I want to know specifically because there's different risks and so forth that you need to be aware of.
But don't you think this is by intent, Patrick? And let's pick up where because just interject for just a second. Don't you think the very fact that we need to be specific about drugs, don't you think that was by design too? The war on drugs, it all got lumped in together.
Sure.
Good, bad, indifferent. You know what I mean? It's all lumped in together. So now when we just say no, it's like, well, just say no. Like, okay, just say no to all of it, apparently. You know what I mean? We're having a war on all of it, apparently.
Right.
We're going to war against a plant.
Right. So say no to coffee? Say no to are we saying no to everything or just, so it's like, no. It's like, but the lines get drawn along political power, and whoever's in power gets to draw those distinctions at the time. So obviously there's risks for addiction that happen with these dopaminergic drugs that act on the dopamine system. Like there's a pretty interesting kind of system around how they like create it seems to, and I'm no expert, I've just read a bit about this, but it seems like they build like these dopaminergic drugs when you abuse them, instead of you kind of your brain developing along a healthy pathway, it builds this kind of fake little personality almost, sub-personality inside of you that's very closely tied to the the things that are going on in your life around you when you're abusing and acting out that way. So it's like, it does get very hard. People get dependent upon these dopaminergic drugs, and And at a very deep level, it's the dopamine system seems to tell us when we're engaged in activity that is meaningful. It's like, so when we're acting, getting up and going to our job and doing a good job at it and making progress and coming home, there's a dopamine surge.
I want to say scientific. That's probably not the right word, but there's actual things going on that make you feel that way.
There's a biological response that orients you in the world in a way that is helpful to you.
Exactly. It's not like, ooh, I feel good today.
No.
It's like random thought. It's like, no, there's actually things going on that make you feel good today.
There's actual chemicals in your brain, and your body and your brain are designed in a way to reward meaningful activity like that.
Yes.
Right? And so when you abuse those reward centers by giving them rewards without having done the work of doing something meaningful, you can see how that could short circuit our whole reward system and lead us astray. And so they become enticing for that reason. It's like there's a lot of us that, we're tempted by looking for shortcuts to meaning, let's say,
Yes. That's a good point.
And so that's why that's so compelling. But it's like, that's those dopaminergic drugs. That's not generally alcohol. People generally, like, alcohol tends to have kind of a dulling effect in some other areas. It's not entirely the same system. So there's other systems in play with alcohol addiction that I don't really understand all that much either. But I wanted to draw that distinction that, like, alcohol is something you can get addicted to. People do. Like, something like 1 in 5 people that ever drink alcohol get addicted to it. Wow. Alcohol is one of the only drugs that causes people almost universally to become aggressive.
Yes, I want to make that point at some point. And
none of the other drugs that we're talking about universally make people aggressive.
That's right.
That I'm aware of. Alcohol does. Alcohol is connected to more than 50% of the murders in this country. So over half of the people who commit murders in this country are using alcohol at the time they do it, and more than half of the people who are killed by murder are using alcohol when they are killed.
Really? That's fascinating.
It's a very high indication for mortality that way. So alcohol, there's not all that much to recommend it in terms of a drug.
That's right.
So it doesn't, there's no real known health benefits to it.
Exactly.
Right. So that's that. Like with caffeine, that's mostly a mind-stimulating drug. It alters your mind. It's a psychoactive drug. It doesn't appear to have any real, like, negative to it. Like, there's not a lot of negative. Some people experience it that way. Like, some people say they don't like caffeine because they feel jittery and anxious, and so they just stay away from it. But most people say, no, it's worth the extra productivity. And it really has changed the productivity of the West since we've become caffeine drinking
Really?
people. Oh, absolutely. Like, our hours, our circadian rhythms are different. We are up more. We sleep less. Oh,
When did this happen?
Well, there's a lot of work. In fact, Michael Pollan, who wrote Changing Your Mind.
How to Change Your Mind.
How to Change Your Mind. He is doing work on caffeine right now, or has just done some work on it.
Oh, interesting.
So it's very fascinating. But that's generally a psychoactive agent that we're open to using, and it doesn't seem to have, any real negative or real downside. It does have what's called an LD50, lethal dose, the lethal dose at which 50% of people die at that dose. So that's a common, like, LD50 is a drug term. It's like, how much do you need to kill half of the people who take it at that dose?
Yep.
Roughly. There is, I think caffeine is something like 10 milligrams is the LD50, and a cup of coffee has 100 milligrams. I'm sorry, 10 grams, a cup of coffee is 100 milligrams. So you could say, what is that, 100?
10? 10? Surely not. 10 cups of coffee.
10 grams. No, 100 cups of coffee. If you could drink 100 cups of coffee at once, then
it would kill half of the people that drank that if they're average citizen.
Yeah. So, it's almost impossible to drink caffeine at a rate that would kill you. But nonetheless, it does.
But it's possible.
But it does have an LD50.
Interesting.
It does have a toxicity.
But also on the health benefits, it's important to point out too that what you're saying, I don't disagree with. If someone's drinking 1, 2, maybe 3 cups a day, if you're drinking 5 to 10 cups of coffee a day, which a lot of people are, some people drink more than that. There is some adverse effects to
Absolutely.
that.
Mostly related to sleep. It's not real. I'm not sure that there's really any other.
Okay.
I mean, sleep's huge. Don't get me wrong.
Well, yeah, but I have maybe this is unfounded, but I thought that it was not the best for your liver to drink that much coffee.
It could be.
I could be off. I don't know.
I know that there's kind of a diuretic effect. So at a certain, you got to be careful to not get dehydrated if you're drinking that much coffee.
Yep.
And all that, but all things in moderation, right?
Yep.
Except for these things that the government decided are forbidden.
Exactly.
So alcohol. What's the LD50 of alcohol?
I don't know. Let's go ahead and Google it real quick. While you're talking about caffeine, we can. That's one type of drug. Is like stimulants too, which caffeine is one. Adderall is a stimulant.
Adderall's a methamphetamine, right?
It could be. Yeah, I'm actually not sure. Well, methamphetamine is another type of stimulant. So I don't know if Adderall is actually methamphetamine. Now I'm exposing my ignorance. But ecstasy,
it's
another stimulant.
I'm looking it up. It's not the same as meth, but chemically speaking, the difference is small. It is it's in the amphetamine family.
Adderall is?
Adderall is in the
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So different similarities and differences, and important ones for sure.
You find it there, Lincoln? Did you find the LD50 on alcohol?
LD50 on alcohol? I have it here. Well, it's the equivalent to 13 shots, but that's where these infographics would be more helpful if they just gave me the actual numbers.
Shots of what? Does it say?
40% ABV.
13 shots of 40% bourbon, for example. That's 80 proof, right?
80 proof, yeah.
Will kill half the people that do it?
Yes, that's my understanding.
That's a lot lower than I thought. Wow.
Well, but keep in mind, too, that you'd have to consume that in pretty short order to make that,
Yeah.
So if you spread that out over 20 minutes, then you've lost that kind of. But
point is, it's dangerous.
Point is, it's pretty dangerous. And I brought the LD50 up because we were also talking about cannabis, and cannabis doesn't have an LD50.
Right.
There's no known toxicity.
No one dies
to it.
from cannabis overdose. It's impossible.
Yeah. As somebody
so
said,
far anyway.
It's, and it's interesting because they've actually learned how to, take the active psychoactive ingredient in cannabis, which is THC, and they've learned to, kind of distill that down to 99% pure. Right. And so that's just like pure THC, whereas, a joint might have 15 to 20% THC.
Yeah.
And this stuff has like 99%. And to my knowledge, nobody's even there's not even a
overdose at that?
I mean, people overdose, but that means they go sleep it off and then they get up and
right.
It's oh, don't do that again.
So there is an overdose. It's just not lethal.
Right, yeah. It's like, okay, I'm going to go lay on the couch for a day.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, your point stands with alcohol, man. It's super dangerous.
It's yes, there's a lot of negative indications when it
really
comes to
is.
the conversation about alcohol.
Well, and a lot of people have died from Tylenol too, because they are messed up on alcohol, and then the next day they have a headache or something. They pop a whole bunch of Tylenol, and the Tylenol, or maybe if it's not even the next day, but then the Tylenol reacts with the alcohol, and bam, it's lights out. You're dead.
150 people a year, acetaminophen poisoning.
150 people a year?
Yeah.
What's acetaminophen? That's when Tylenol interacts with alcohol, or what?
Time magazine reported that 500 people a year die from overdosing on acetaminophen. 150 die from acetaminophen poisoning. I don't know what the difference is between those two.
Interesting.
But yeah, it's by far, certainly more people than die from, say, cannabis, for example.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
But, so there are dangerous compounds that we're talking about, and then there's not dangerous compounds.
Exactly.
The dangerous ones, we talked about the dopaminergic ones. They have an addictive quality to them. They have actual health risks with overuse. They can cause your heart to stop at some level. All those things, it's a risk. We've talked about alcohol and its risks. We've talked about cannabis not really having a risk. So what are some of the pros